He thought he could humiliate a 14-year-old in front of a crowd, laughing when she said her mother was a judge. But when her mom appeared, the laughter died instantly. You ever notice how the smallest, most ordinary days can flip upside down in seconds? That's what happened to 14-year-old Imani Richardson on a Saturday afternoon inside the Southridge Mall in Des Moines, Iowa. It wasn't anything special, just a group of kids laughing, carrying smoothies, and checking out shoe displays. But in that ordinary space, in a few minutes, a scene would erupt that people still talk about, because it revealed a clash of arrogance, bias, and authority all in one place. Imani was with two of her closest friends, Caden Brooks and Sierra Walton. Caden had just bought a pair of Nike Air Max, and Sierra was teasing him about how long he'd taken to choose. The three of them had that teenage rhythm, half jokes, half selfies, and a little too much energy. To anyone else, it looked like kids enjoying their weekend. But not to Brian Kessler. Kessler was in his mid-40s, a broad-shouldered man with cropped grey hair and a presence that made people notice him before he even spoke. Off-duty from the local police department, he worked security shifts at the mall. That day he was pacing the second floor near the food court, scanning the crowd like every movement was a threat. When his eyes locked on Imani and her friends, his steps slowed. Maybe it was their laughter, maybe it was their skin color, maybe it was both. What mattered was the decision he made in that moment. He was going to stop them. "Hey, you three!" Kessler barked as he approached, his voice echoing louder than necessary. "What do you think you're doing here?" Sierra blinked, confused. "We're shopping?" Kessler shook his head like he'd already heard enough. "Don't play smart with me. I've been watching. You've been hanging around the same spot for 20 minutes. That's loitering." Caden frowned, clutching his shoebox tighter. "I literally just bought these." But Kessler wasn't interested in proof. His hand rested on his belt, not his gun, because technically he was only in his security uniform, but it was close enough to suggest authority. He squared his shoulders, towering over them. "Don't get slick. I said you're loitering. That's not allowed. Do I need to escort you out?" Imani felt her chest tighten, but she forced herself to keep her voice steady. "Sir, we're not doing anything wrong. My mom is supposed to meet me here in a few minutes." "Your mom?" Kessler tilted his head with mock concern. "And who is Mommy? Maybe she can teach you how to follow rules." Imani hesitated. She hadn't planned on mentioning it, but something about the smirk on his face pushed her to say it. "My mother is Judge Imani Richardson. She's a federal judge downtown." For a split second, there was silence. Caden and Sierra exchanged looks, almost holding their breath, waiting for the officer's response. Then Kessler threw his head back and laughed. Not a chuckle, not a polite laugh, but a full-throated, mocking laugh that turned a few heads nearby. "A federal judge? That's rich. That's the best excuse I've heard all week." He jabbed a finger toward her. "Kid, you could have said your mom's the president, and it wouldn't make a difference. You're loitering." Imani's cheeks burned. She wanted to shrink into the tiled floor. Around them, shoppers began to slow down, curious about the raised voice and the uniform. Some whispered, others stared openly. And with every second, Kessler's laughter felt like a spotlight shining directly on her. Sierra muttered under her breath, "This is messed up." Caden stepped forward slightly, his voice tight. "She's telling the truth, man. You don't gotta talk to her like that." But Kessler only scoffed, puffing his chest out as if the audience gave him more power. "What's the matter? Can't take a little authority? Maybe you should learn some respect before throwing around fairy tales about federal judges." Imani swallowed hard. She knew her mom would be arriving soon, but the seconds felt endless. She wasn't scared of being kicked out of the mall. She was scared of being humiliated in front of strangers, of being seen as just another kid who couldn't possibly come from a family with influence. And as Kessler leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough for only them to hear, he sneered. "You're not special. Don't forget that." Imani clenched her fists at her sides, holding back tears. She reminded herself of her mother's words, the ones she always repeated. "Hold your head high. No one gets to write your story for you." But right now, surrounded by curious eyes and Kessler's mocking laughter, those words felt distant. What she didn't know What Kessler didn't know was that Judge Marcia Richardson was already making her way through the parking lot toward the entrance, and when she stepped inside, everything about this moment would change. But before we get there, the scene inside the mall is about to get even more tense. The seconds dragged on. Imani stood with her back straight, trying to look calm, though inside she was boiling. Her friends shifted uncomfortably. The crowd had grown. 10, maybe 15 people now lingering just far enough to pretend they were shopping, but close enough to witness what was happening. And Brian Kessler loved it. He crossed his arms, scanning the teenagers as if they were criminals caught red-handed. His voice carried like he wanted the entire second floor to hear him. "You three think you're clever, don't you? Hanging around, blocking the walkway, causing trouble." Imani felt a knot form in her stomach. "We're not causing trouble. We were just waiting for my mom. She told me to meet her by the shoe store." "That's so?" Kessler raised a brow. "Funny. I didn't see her. What I saw was 3 kids laughing, making noise, getting in the way. That's enough to get you escorted out." Caden lifted his receipt, his hands trembling slightly. "Man, I just spent money here. You can ask the cashier." Kessler cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Doesn't matter. Loitering is loitering. Don't think buying one thing gives you a free pass to hang around all day." The way he said it stung. It wasn't just the words, it was the smirk underneath them, like he'd already decided who they were before the conversation even started. Imani could feel it. Sierra whispered, "He's treating us like criminals." That was when Kessler stepped closer, narrowing the gap between himself and the group. "Look, I'll make this simple. Either you leave the premises, or I call for backup. And trust me, you don't want that kind of attention." Imani blinked. "Backup? For what? We didn't do anything wrong." Kessler's lips curled into a grin. "That's what they all say," the crowd murmured. A middle-aged woman in a denim jacket whispered to her husband, "They're just kids." Another man shook his head, muttering something under his breath about respecting authority. Opinions were splitting, and that only fueled Kessler further. Imani's hands shook, but she forced her words out carefully. "My mother is coming. She's a federal judge. You're going to regret talking to us this way." And once again, Kessler burst into laughter. His voice boomed so loudly that even people down by the food court turned to look. "A federal judge? That's your story? Let me guess. Next you're going to tell me the president's your uncle." He slapped his knee dramatically, feeding on the stares of passers-by. Caden muttered under his breath, "Man, he's not even listening." Imani's cheeks burned hot. She felt a tear threaten to rise, but she blinked it back furiously. If there was one thing her mother had drilled into her, it was never to let someone like this see you cry. "I'm not lying," she said firmly, her voice louder this time. Kessler leaned down, close enough that only she and her friends could hear. His tone dropped, cruel and sharp. "Listen, sweetheart, you can spin whatever fairy tale you want, but you're still just a kid I caught loitering, and nobody in this mall cares who you think you are." The words pierced her. For a moment she felt small, invisible. But Sierra spoke up, louder than she meant to, her voice shaking with anger. "You can't talk to her like that! She's not lying!" Kessler snapped his head toward Sierra, eyes narrowing. "Watch your mouth, young lady! You want to spend the rest of your afternoon in the security office?" "I can make that happen." Sierra froze, her bravado shrinking under his glare. The crowd thickened. Some people pulled out phones, raising them discreetly to record. Others simply stared. A little boy tugged on his mother's sleeve and asked, "Why is he yelling at them?" She hushed him quickly, guiding him away. Imani's heart hammered. Her mother had to be close. She could almost feel it, the way she always sensed when her mum walked into a room. But right now, Kessler was still towering over them, and every word he spoke was like fuel on a fire. "You kids don't understand how the world works," he said, shaking his head in mock disappointment. "You think rules don't apply to you. You think you can just talk back to authority and get away with it, but not today." Imani's hands tightened around her phone. Part of her wanted to call her mom right then, but she also knew her mother hated distractions while driving. She prayed silently, "Please hurry, Mum. Please get here now." Caden tried again, his voice steady this time. "We're not lying. Her mom really is Judge Richardson. Everyone in this city knows her. Kessler chuckled, shaking his head. Kid, I've been in this city longer than you've been alive. If there was a federal judge strolling into this mall, I'd know. Don't waste my time. The arrogance in his tone was suffocating. But just as he finished, a sound echoed from the mall entrance, the distinct click of heels on polished tile. It was sharp, deliberate, and growing louder with every step. Some in the crowd turned first, then whispered. Heads began to shift toward the escalators. And there she was. Judge Marcia Richardson. Tall, poised, still in her black blazer from court, her eyes scanning the scene in seconds. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The air seemed to bend around her presence. Kessler hadn't noticed yet. He was still busy lecturing teenagers. But Imani's heart leapt as she saw her mother's familiar silhouette moving closer, her pace quickening. Relief mixed with adrenaline. Because now, the story was about to change. But the moment Marcia opened her mouth, the entire balance of power in that shopping center shifted. The footsteps grew louder, but Kessler remained fixated on the kids, as if the crowd didn't matter, as if his word was the only one that counted. He crossed his arms, leaning down toward Imani, a smug grin plastered on his face. You know what the problem is with kids like you. You think if you throw out some big title, some fancy story, people will just back off. But that's not how it works in the real world. Imani clenched her jaw. I'm not making it up. Kessler chuckled again, loud and theatrical, drawing more eyes their way. A federal judge, huh? That's your mom? That's hilarious. Do you all hear this? He turned slightly to the onlookers, gesturing toward Imani like she was the punchline of a comedy routine. This girl says her mom is a federal judge. Can you believe that? A few in the crowd looked uncomfortable, but others shook their heads, smirking as if they'd already picked sides. The sting wasn't just in Kessler's words. It was in the laughter he was fishing for, the way he wanted to humiliate her publicly. Sierra stepped closer to Imani, her voice sharp. Why is that so hard to believe? She's telling you the truth. Kessler raised an eyebrow, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh, of course, because it's so common, right? Every other kid in this mall has a parent on the federal bench. He rolled his eyes dramatically. Next you'll be telling me her dad's the Attorney General. Imani's cheeks burned as the laughter spread among a few bystanders. She wanted to scream, to shout at all of them that this wasn't a joke. But instead, she stood straighter, forcing strength into her trembling voice. I don't need to prove anything to you. She's coming. And when she does, you'll see. That confidence only made Kessler grin wider. Oh, I can't wait. I'd love to meet this so-called judge mom of yours. Maybe she can teach you how to respect authority instead of making up fairy tales. Caden stepped in again, his hands shaking, but his voice steady. You keep laughing now, but you're gonna look real stupid in about 5 minutes. Kessler turned on him, his smirk vanishing into a cold glare. Watch your tone, kid. You don't want to test me. The tension was thick. People in the crowd were openly recording now, their phones raised. One young woman whispered to her friend, He's going too far. Another muttered, He's enjoying this. Imani's heart raced. Every word Kessler spoke made her angrier, but also more determined not to crack. She could hear her mother's voice in her head again. The higher they laugh at you, the harder they fall when truth walks in. She swallowed back the lump in her throat. You think it's funny now, but you'll see. Kessler leaned in so close she could smell the sharp tang of his cologne. His voice dropped into a whisper. Let me give you some advice, sweetheart. People like me, we don't care about your stories. We care about the rules. And right now, the rule is, you're loitering. The word stung, not because of what it meant, but because of the way he said it. Like she was less than him. Like nothing she could say mattered. Sierra muttered through clenched teeth. This is harassment. Kessler straightened up, smirking again. Harassment? You don't know the meaning of the word. I'm giving you a chance to walk out of here quietly. That's more than you deserve. The crowd buzzed louder. Someone in the back shouted, They're kids! Leave them alone! Others just watched silently, their faces unreadable. Imani's hands trembled, but she held her ground. My mom is Judge Richardson. You'll regret this. And then, It happened. From the corner of her eye, Imani saw movement. Her mother's familiar stride cut through the crowd, purposeful and commanding. Judge Marcia Richardson wasn't the tallest woman in the room, but her presence filled it instantly. Black blazer, crisp, posture strong, expression sharp enough to silence anyone within reach. Imani's chest flooded with relief. She whispered, almost to herself, "She's here." But Kessler didn't notice right away. He was still laughing, shaking his head. "Oh, I bet she is. Any second now, right? Well, I'm standing right here, waiting." That was when Marcia's voice cut through the noise. Calm, firm, unmistakable. "Is there a problem here?" The crowd parted slightly, as if instinctively making room for her. Kessler turned, his smirk faltering when he locked eyes with the woman approaching. He froze for just a second too long, and in that pause, the entire balance shifted. Imani's heart soared. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, the moment the laughter would stop. But the way her mother handled the next few seconds stunned everyone, including Kessler himself. The sound of Judge Marcia Richardson's voice seemed to cut the air in two. Strong, clear, and calm, it carried across the cluster of shoppers. "Is there a problem here?" she repeated, her eyes scanning Kessler and then resting on her daughter. Imani exhaled so hard it almost turned into a sob. Her mom was here. Finally. Sierra whispered, "Thank God," and Caden muttered under his breath, "About time." Kessler, though, was caught off guard. For the first time since the confrontation began, his smirk faltered. He glanced at Marcia, then back at the kids, as though trying to piece the situation together. His voice, still dripping with authority, came out just a little less confident. "Ma'am, these kids have been loitering. Disrupting the shopping center. I was handling it." Marcia stopped a few feet from him, her eyes sharp. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Handling it? By mocking them in public? By threatening to call backup on 3 teenagers standing by a store? The crowd stirred. Some murmured words of agreement, others leaned in closer. A woman in a red cardigan whispered to her friend, "She sounds serious." Imani stood taller now, her mother's presence giving her strength. "Mom, I told him you were coming. He laughed at me." Marcia's gaze didn't leave Kessler. "She told you I was her mother?" Kessler cleared his throat. "With respect, ma'am, kids say a lot of things when they're in trouble. I didn't take it seriously." "Clearly," Marcia said flatly. The onlookers could feel the shift. Phones that had been raised discreetly were now lifted boldly. Some even stepped closer for a better angle. It wasn't every day you saw a federal judge go head-to-head with mall security. One man whispered to his teenage daughter, "Record this. People need to see it." Kessler, realizing the eyes on him, tried to reassert himself. He planted his hands on his belt and puffed out his chest. "With all due respect, Mom, I was just doing my job. These kids were standing around, causing a scene." Marcia's eyebrows rose slightly. "A scene? The only scene I see is you mocking my child for telling the truth. Tell me, officer, what exactly about their behavior justified public humiliation?" The crowd murmured again, this time louder. "Exactly," someone called out. Another shopper, a man in a baseball cap, added, "They were just standing there." Kessler's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected pushback from the bystanders. He turned slightly, gesturing toward the teens. "They were loitering. That's against mall policy. I had every right to question them." Marcia's tone remained steady, but sharper now. "Questioning is one thing. Belittling a 14-year-old girl in front of strangers is another. Did you really laugh at her when she told you who her mother was?" The silence was telling. Everyone waited. Kessler shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the phones recording him. Finally he muttered, "She made a claim that sounded outrageous. I reacted." "Outrageous?" Marcia repeated. She turned briefly to the crowd, her voice carrying. "My daughter told the truth, and instead of treating her with dignity, he turned her honesty into a spectacle. That's not security. That's abuse of authority." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the bystanders. Someone clapped softly. Another voice said, "She's right." Imani's heart pounded, but now with pride instead of humiliation. She watched her mother, unwavering, dismantling every ounce of arrogance Kessler had wielded against her. Kessler's voice grew defensive. Look, I didn't know who she was. I was just doing my job. Marcia took a step closer, her eyes never leaving his. Then perhaps you should learn how to do your job without degrading children. Authority does not give you the right to belittle. The crowd was fully engaged now. Shoppers who had been passing by stopped to watch. Some nodded in agreement, others whispered furiously into their phones as they streamed live. The energy in the air had shifted completely. Sierra whispered to Imani, "Everyone's on your side now." Kessler tried to salvage control, his tone sharper. "With respect, Judge Richardson, you're making a scene too. You should understand procedures better than anyone." Marcia didn't flinch. "And you should understand accountability. I will not let anyone speak to my daughter this way." The weight of her words sank in. A hush fell briefly, broken only by the clicking of heels from someone else approaching. Mall management, alerted by the growing commotion. The manager, a short man with thinning hair and a nervous smile, rushed over. "What's going on here?" His eyes darted between Kessler, Marcia, and the gathering crowd. Marcia spoke before Kessler could answer. "What's going on is your security officer publicly mocked my daughter, threatened her friends, and laughed when she told the truth about who her mother was. That's what's going on." The manager's face drained of color. "Judge Richardson," he stammered. I had no idea." The crowd erupted in whispers again, the weight of the revelation rippling outward. Kessler's smirk was gone. His authority crumbled with every word spoken by Marcia. Imani looked at her mother, feeling seen, defended, and, most importantly, believed. But this confrontation was far from over, because Kessler wasn't ready to surrender his pride without a fight. Judge Marcia Richardson didn't move quickly, but every step she took carried weight. She didn't need to raise her voice or wave her arms. Her presence alone demanded attention. The crowd shifted further back, instinctively clearing a path. Imani felt a rush of relief, like air finally filling her lungs after being held underwater too long. Marcia's eyes locked on Brian Kessler, and in that moment, the power imbalance flipped. She didn't look at him with fear, or even with anger. It was something colder, something that made Kessler adjust his stance without realizing it. "Officer Kessler, is it?" she asked, her tone steady. Kessler stiffened, caught off guard that she knew his name. Yes, ma'am, that's right. You've been harassing my daughter and her friends," Marcia said, her words precise, like each one was chosen with care. "Mocking her in public, dismissing her when she told the truth, and threatening them with unnecessary escalation. Do you deny this?" Kessler opened his mouth, then shut it again. The eyes of the crowd burned into him. He tried to gather himself, clearing his throat. "Ma'am, with respect, they were loitering. I had cause to address them." Marcia took a half step closer, her heels clicking against the tile. "And addressing them requires ridicule? You laughed at my daughter when she identified herself, didn't you?" The silence was suffocating. Everyone waited for his response. Kessler swallowed, his bravado weakening. "I may have reacted inappropriately," the crowd murmured, phones recording every second. Someone near the back muttered, "That's putting it lightly." Imani's shoulders straightened. She no longer felt small. Her mom was here, and every person watching could see the truth. Marcia's voice sharpened. "In your position, the expectation is to de-escalate, not to antagonize. You are entrusted with authority, but authority means responsibility. It does not give you permission to humiliate a child." Kessler bristled, his pride fighting back. "Judge Richardson, with all due respect, I didn't know she was your daughter. I treat everyone the same." Marcia's eyes narrowed. "If this is how you treat everyone, then you've just admitted to a serious problem. This isn't about her being my daughter. It's about you abusing your role as an officer of the law, even when off-duty. Laughing at a 14-year-old, threatening to drag them into a security office, that is not equal treatment. That is intimidation." The crowd broke into louder whispers, some nodding their heads, others shaking them in disbelief. Sierra leaned toward Imani and whispered, "Your mom's killing him right now." Caden added under his breath, "He doesn't stand a chance." Kessler's jaw tightened. He could feel the situation slipping through his fingers, but stubbornness clung to him. "Ma'am, I was simply doing my job." Marcia's tone turned icy. Your job does not include humiliation. Your job does not include mocking children. Your job does not include creating a spectacle out of your arrogance. If this is how you interpret doing your job, then I fear for the citizens who encounter you in uniform." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Some even clapped quietly, though they quickly stopped, realizing how serious the exchange had become. The mall manager wrung his hands nervously beside them. "Judge Richardson, please, let's keep this civil." Marcia cut him off, her voice firm but controlled. "Civility was lost the moment your officer mocked my child in public." She turned back to Kessler. "Now, are you going to apologize, or do I need to file a formal complaint with the department?" Kessler's face flushed red. He glanced at the cameras, at the strangers recording him, then at Marcia's piercing gaze. Every option before him looked like defeat. Imani held her breath, waiting. Sierra squeezed her hand, and Caden leaned closer, whispering, "He has to back down now." But Kessler wasn't ready to surrender his pride so easily. He forced a smirk, though it was weaker now, cracked at the edges. "An apology? Sure, if that's what it takes." He turned his eyes toward Imani. "Sorry, kid." The words were flat, hollow, insincere. The crowd sensed it. A murmur of disapproval ran through them. Marcia didn't let it slide. "That's not an apology. That's avoidance." She took another step closer, her eyes never leaving his. "Look at her. Say her name. And mean it." Kessler shifted uncomfortably. His lips pressed into a thin line, then finally parted. "Imani Richardson, I apologize. I shouldn't have laughed at you." The words hung heavy in the air. Imani's throat tightened. It wasn't enough. It could never undo what he had done. But hearing him say it, in front of everyone, mattered. Marcia gave a single, sharp nod. "Better. Though the consequences of your behavior don't vanish with words." The crowd buzzed again. Phones lowered and raised as people exchanged glances. Some looked outraged on Imani's behalf, others stunned at the judge's authority. But just as the tension seemed to crest, Marcia's phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't take her eyes off Kessler as she answered it briefly, stepping aside. That pause gave Kessler a sliver of space to regroup, and he wasn't ready to let this end without clawing some control back. But Kessler's pride was a stubborn fire, and instead of letting it die, he chose to fan the flames. Kessler's apology had been dragged out of him like a child forced to share a toy, and everyone knew it. His voice lacked sincerity, his shoulders screamed resentment, and the crowd's murmurs proved no one was buying it. Yet even after the words left his mouth, he straightened again, trying to salvage some measure of authority. As Marcia tucked her phone away, he shifted his weight, puffed up his chest and said, "Look, Judge Richardson, with respect, you're blowing this way out of proportion. I addressed a security issue. That's all this was." Marcia turned back, her expression sharp as glass. "A security issue? You publicly laughed at a minor and threatened her friends for standing near a shoe store. If that's your idea of a security threat, then perhaps your judgment is the real problem here." The crowd reacted audibly. Some chuckled at her sharpness, others muttered agreement. A college-aged bystander whispered into his phone, "She's tearing him apart. This is insane." Imani watched, her chest swelling with pride. This was her mother, the woman she admired most, the one who never let Enon diminish her or anyone she loved. But it was also terrifying to see the tension climbing. Kessler's lips twisted, irritation bubbling just under the surface. "With all due respect, Judge, you don't understand what it's like working security in a place like this. You don't see the kind of people who come in here day after day, causing problems. I can't afford to take chances." Marcia's eyebrows rose. "So your defense is prejudice? That because you've seen others cause problems, you assume any group of teenagers standing in public must be up to no good? That's not policing. That's profiling." The word had landed heavy. Several people in the crowd nodded, some even clapped softly before stopping, aware of the gravity. Kessler shifted again, clearly uncomfortable but too stubborn to back down. "I make quick judgments to keep people safe. That's my job." Marcia took a step closer, her tone unflinching. "Your job is to protect and serve. Not embarrass, not demean, not assume guilt without evidence. The safety of this community depends on fairness, not arrogance. Do you believe you demonstrated fairness here today? Kessler's mouth opened, but no words came out. His eyes darted to the crowd, to the phones filming, to the mall manager standing helplessly to the side. For once, his silence spoke louder than his arrogance. Imani felt Sierra grip her hand tighter, whispering, "He can't even answer." Caden muttered, "He's cornered." The mall manager finally stepped in, his voice shaky. "Officer Kessler, perhaps it's best you step away for now." But Kessler snapped back. "I don't need to step away. I've done nothing wrong." His tone rose, sharper now, like a wounded animal trying to reassert dominance. He looked at the crowd, desperate. "I was enforcing the rules. That's my responsibility." Marcia didn't flinch. She turned slightly, her voice now carrying not just to Kessler but to everyone watching. "Authority without accountability is dangerous. If this is how he handles 3 teenagers, imagine how he handles situations without cameras present. We should all be asking, who watches the people we trust with authority?" The crowd erupted in whispers, some loud enough to carry, "She's right." That's exactly the issue. This is bigger than just today. Imani's throat tightened with emotion. She'd felt so small minutes earlier, reduced to a punchline in front of strangers. Now her mother's words transformed that humiliation into something bigger, a public reckoning. Kessler, though, wasn't ready to surrender. His pride was raw, fraying at the edges. He pointed toward Imani, his voice sharp. "She pulled the judge card the second I confronted her. What was I supposed to think? Kids lie to get out of trouble." Marcia stepped forward, closing the gap between them, her voice slicing through his excuse. "And when kids tell the truth, do you laugh in their faces? Do you mock them until they feel worthless? That isn't enforcement, officer. It's bullying." The word bullying hit the crowd hard. Gasps echoed. Someone near the escalator shouted, "Exactly!" Kessler faltered. His face reddened, his voice stumbled. "That's not what I didn't—" Marcia didn't let him finish. "You humiliated my daughter because you assumed her story wasn't credible. You dismissed her honesty because it didn't fit your expectation of who she could be. And that assumption tells me more about you than it does about her." The weight of her words lingered. Silence fell. Even the background noise of the mall seemed muted under the intensity of the confrontation. Imani's eyes glistened. She felt her mother's words land not just on Kessler, but on everyone watching. For the first time since the confrontation began, she no longer felt like a victim. She felt vindicated. Kessler stood there, cornered by truth and the cameras that captured every second. His authority, once a weapon, now looked flimsy under the light of accountability. The mall manager cleared his throat nervously. "Judge Richardson, perhaps we should take this somewhere private." Marcia turned her gaze on him, calm but firm. "No, this happened publicly. It will be addressed publicly." The crowd stirred again, emboldened. For once, the authority figure wasn't the one dictating the narrative. But Kessler's pride wasn't extinguished yet, and his next move would push the tension even higher. The mall air was thick, the kind of tension you could almost touch. Phones were everywhere now, held high, flashing red recording lights. If Kessler once had the advantage, it had long evaporated. But instead of retreating, he doubled down, his voice rising as if volume could restore the authority slipping through his fingers. "You all think this is a joke, huh?" he barked, sweeping his eyes across the bystanders. "I'm the one in uniform here. I'm the one responsible for keeping order, and you—" He pointed at Imani with a jabbing finger. "You thought you could make me look stupid by throwing out your mom's title." Imani didn't flinch this time. She straightened her shoulders and met his eyes. "I didn't make you look stupid. You did that all by yourself." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone laughed nervously. Sierra squeezed Imani's arm in both pride and shock, whispering, "Girl, you really said that." Kessler's face flushed red, a vein pulsing at his temple. He opened his mouth, but Marcia stepped forward before he could speak. Her voice carried the controlled sharpness of a courtroom. "Officer Kessler, my daughter doesn't owe you silence in the face of humiliation. She owed you respect, and she gave it. You failed to return it." The weight of her words hit him like a blow. He tried again, his voice cracking under pressure. "Respect goes both ways. I didn't disrespect anyone until—" Marcia cut him off, her tone calm but piercing. Until you laughed in a 14-year-old girl's face. Until you turned truth into ridicule. That's where you lost your standing. The crowd murmured louder. One man near the back said, "She's right. He was mocking her the whole time." Another woman shook her head. "And he wonders why people don't trust security." Kessler's fists clenched at his sides. He turned to the mall manager, his voice desperate now. "Are you going to let her talk to me like this? I work for you." The manager, sweating under the weight of all those recording phones, stammered, I think maybe we should all calm down." Marcia pivoted to him, her voice steady. "Calm is what was lost when your officer decided my daughter was worth less than his mockery. If this is the culture you allow under your roof, then accountability will extend to you as well." The manager paled, caught between his employee and the federal judge, glaring at him. He opened his mouth, then shut it again, fumbling with his tie nervously. Kessler tried once more to salvage control, his tone defiant. "Judge Richardson, you may hold power in a courtroom, but here in this mall, I have authority. And I won't let a teenager or even you strip me of it." The crowd erupted in whispers again, some shocked, others outraged. "Did he just say that to her?" One man muttered. "He's done," another replied. Marcia didn't raise her voice, but the intensity in her tone silenced everyone. "Authority is not armor. It is not a shield to wield against those weaker than you. Authority exists to serve, and right now, every eye on you sees how poorly you have used it." The words landed like a gavel striking wood. Even the mall itself seemed to still, as if waiting for his response. Kessler faltered, his mouth opening and closing without sound. The crowd recorded every second, capturing not just his words, but his silence. Imani felt her chest swell with something she hadn't expected. Strength. She wasn't just surviving the humiliation anymore, she was standing in the middle of its undoing. Sierra whispered, "He can't come back from this." Caden nodded, his eyes wide. "He's finished." Finally, Kessler muttered, his voice almost breaking. "I was just trying to do my job." Marcia shook her head slowly. "No, you were trying to do more than your job. You were trying to assert yourself at the expense of children. That is the difference." The crowd erupted in low claps this time, hesitant at first, but growing louder until it became undeniable. Phones captured the applause, the murmurs, the looks exchanged between strangers who knew they were witnessing something bigger than mall drama. Kessler's shoulders slumped. The smirk was gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man who realized he was losing not just control of the situation, but the narrative of who he was in this moment. Marcia leaned closer, her voice low enough for him but still audible to those nearby. "Accountability isn't optional. You will answer for today." Imani exhaled, feeling the sting of humiliation finally begin to lift. Her mom wasn't just defending her, she was showing her that truth, when spoken firmly, could shatter arrogance. But as powerful as the moment was, the scene wasn't over. Mall security radios crackled in the distance, and more officers began to approach. The confrontation had drawn enough attention that higher-ups were stepping in, but the arrival of more security and mall management would only add fuel to the fire, and the fallout was just beginning. The buzz of radios cut through the air before the second wave of security even appeared. Heads turned as two more officers in Navy Mall uniforms pushed through the crowd, their heavy boots echoing against the tile. They looked from Kessler to Marcia, then at the growing circle of people holding up phones like courtroom spectators waiting for a verdict. One of the officers, a tall woman with sandy blonde hair tied back in a bun, approached cautiously. "What's going on here?" Her tone was clipped but uncertain. She could already sense the tension. Before Kessler could speak, Marcia answered, her words measured but firm. "What's going on is that your colleague here publicly mocked my daughter, dismissed her honesty and humiliated her in front of dozens of witnesses. Now, I want this addressed properly." The blonde officer glanced at Kessler, whose face was flushed and tight, then back at Marcia. "Judge Richardson, is it?" she asked carefully. "Yes," Marcia said simply, her posture unwavering. The recognition hit instantly. The officer's expression shifted, respect mixing with unease. She nodded slowly. "Understood." The crowd murmured louder, the revelation rippling outward again. Someone whispered, "That really is her mom. She's the judge." Another muttered, "No wonder he looks nervous." Kessler's fists clenched. He stepped forward, his voice low but strained. "You don't need to say it like that. She's just another person here." Marcia turned her gaze on him, her tone cutting. "I am a public servant, yes, but right now, I'm a mother, and you owe my daughter more than a forced apology." The blonde officer shifted uncomfortably, sensing the weight of the moment. "Judge Richardson, I'll file a report with management. We'll review the footage and—" The crowd interrupted. "Footage! We've all got footage!" a man shouted, holding up his phone. Others raised their screens higher. "It's all recorded," another woman added. The mall manager looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. His eyes darted nervously between the phones, the judge, and Kessler. "Judge Richardson, please, let's handle this privately," he pleaded. Marcia shook her head. "No, this was done in public. It will be addressed in public." Imani stood silently at her mother's side, her eyes darting across the crowd. For the first time all day, she didn't feel alone. People were standing with her, not just friends, not just her mom, but strangers who had seen the whole thing unfold. Their presence mattered. Sierra whispered, "Everyone's on our side now." Caden added, "He doesn't even realize how bad he looks." Kessler, red-faced and breathing heavy, turned toward the crowd. "You all don't understand. I was enforcing mall policy. These kids were loitering, blocking customers, making a scene." A voice from the crowd cut him off. "No, you were the one making a scene." Another shouted, "You laughed at her. We all heard it." The crowd swelled with energy, phones angled closer, catching every grimace, every word. The pressure mounted. Kessler's voice cracked as he snapped, "You weren't there at the start." But they had been there. They'd seen enough. Marcia's voice rose slightly, calm but commanding. "The problem isn't mall policy, Officer Kessler. The problem is the way you handled it. Children deserve respect, whether their mother is a federal judge or not. And today, you showed this entire community how poorly you honor that responsibility." The blonde officer stepped in again, this time firmer. "Officer Kessler, I think it's best you step away for now." Kessler's jaw tightened, his pride fighting to the bitter end. "You can't just, But the mall manager cut him off, his voice trembling. "Brian, enough! Step away!" It was the final crack. His shoulders sagged, his breath coming hard, and with a glare at the crowd, he finally stepped back. A wave of relief rippled through the bystanders. Some clapped quietly, others just exhaled like they'd been holding their breath for 10 minutes. Imani's chest loosened. For the first time since it began, she felt safe again. Marcia turned to her daughter, her voice softening. "Are you all right?" Imani nodded, though her throat tightened with emotion. "Yeah, now I am." The moment lingered. For all the tension, for all the humiliation, something had shifted. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore. They were witnessing the imbalance of power, the abuse of it, and the correction that came when truth stood firm. A man in the back spoke up, his voice clear. "This is why people don't trust authority. Because of moments like this." Another voice answered, "And this is why accountability matters." The energy had changed completely. What had started as humiliation for Imani was now something else. A lesson, not just for her, but for everyone who had seen it. But even as the scene began to quiet, Marcia knew the story wasn't finished. Words could sting, and apologies could ring hollow, but the deeper wound was what it meant for her daughter to face this so young. But the most important part of this story wasn't the confrontation in the mall. It was the conversation that followed between mother and daughter. The crowd eventually began to thin, but the energy of the confrontation lingered like a heavy echo. Shoppers still whispered as they walked past, and a few paused to offer Imani quiet nods of encouragement, subtle gestures that said, "We saw you. We believe you." Marcia kept her composure, guiding her daughter and her friends toward a quieter corner of the mall, near a row of benches by a department store. The cameras had stopped rolling, but the weight of what had happened was far from gone. Imani dropped onto the bench, her body finally letting out all the tension it had been holding. Her hands shook slightly as she pressed them against her knees. Sierra and Caden hovered beside her, unsure if they should leave or stay. Marcia sat down beside her daughter, placing a steady hand over hers. Her voice softened, carrying none of the sharp edge she'd used against Kessler. "Imani, talk to me. How are you feeling?" Imani hesitated. The words tangled in her chest. I felt so small, Mom. Like I wasn't even a person. He laughed at me like I was a joke. And everyone saw." Her voice cracked, tears threatening. Marcia squeezed her hand. "You weren't a joke. You were brave. You stood your ground when someone tried to diminish you. That strength matters." Imani shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. "But it felt like nothing I said mattered until you showed up. Like I couldn't make him believe me." Marcia turned slightly, her eyes serious. "That wasn't about you. That was about him. People like Kessler live on assumptions. They decide who you are before you even open your mouth. That's not your failure. That's his." Sierra spoke up softly, her voice trembling with anger. "He treated us like criminals, like we didn't belong there. If your mom hadn't come—" Her words trailed off. Caden finished for her, his jaw tight. "He would have dragged us out, no question, and then everyone would have just assumed he was right." Marcia nodded slowly. "That's why what happened today matters. Not because of his arrogance, but because of the lesson it leaves behind. You cannot control the bias of others, but you can control how you respond. And you, all of you, responded with honesty." Imani wiped her eyes. "But it hurt so much. I kept thinking, what if you weren't here? What if no one believed me?" Marcia's tone softened further. "Then you would have still had the truth. And sometimes the truth feels like the loneliest thing in the world, but it's still yours, and it always comes back stronger." The three teens sat quietly, her words sinking in. Sierra leaned her head against Imani's shoulder, a silent show of solidarity. Caden stared down at his shoes, frowning. "I don't get how people like him get to wear a badge." Marcia exhaled slowly. "Because systems aren't perfect. They're built by people, and people carry their flaws with them. Some use authority to serve. Others use it to control. The challenge is learning the difference, and never letting people like that define your worth." Imani looked at her mother, her voice barely above a whisper. "I tried to remember what you always say, about holding my head high. But when he laughed, it felt like the floor dropped out under me." Marcia tilted her daughter's chin gently, meeting her eyes. "And yet, you're still standing. That's the part you must never forget. He wanted you to feel small. Instead, you showed everyone watching what dignity looks like under pressure. You taught him, and everyone else, a lesson he won't forget." For a moment, silence held them. The noise of the mall in the background, footsteps, chatter, the occasional squeak of a stroller wheel, felt distant compared to the gravity of their conversation. Sierra broke the silence with a shaky laugh. "I can't believe you told him off like that, Imani. You said he made himself look stupid. That was... wow." Imani smiled faintly, though her cheeks still burned from earlier humiliation. "I didn't even plan it. It just came out." Caden smirked. "Well, it landed. Hard." Marcia allowed herself the faintest smile, too. "That's because it was the truth. Truth doesn't need rehearsing. It stands on its own." Imani leaned against her mother, feeling the warmth of her arm. For the first time all afternoon, she let herself cry. Not from humiliation this time, but from relief, from gratitude, from the weight lifting off her chest. Marcia held her close, whispering, "You'll face people like him again. Maybe not in a mall, maybe not in uniform, but in life. And when you do, remember today. Remember that their laughter doesn't diminish you. It exposes them." The lesson lingered in the quiet moment between them. The confrontation had left scars, yes, but it had also left something else. Resilience, sharpened and strengthened in the fire of humiliation. But what happened at Southridge Mall was bigger than a mother defending her daughter. It was a mirror of the broader struggles so many face every day, and that larger picture is where this story truly finds its weight. The shopping center eventually went back to its ordinary rhythm. Families carrying bags, teenagers laughing near the food court, announcements echoing over the intercom. But for Imani, her friends, and everyone who stood there watching, The day was anything but ordinary. It had left a mark, one that reached far beyond a single confrontation. In the car ride home, the air was heavy, but calm. Imani leaned against the window, replaying every second in her mind, the mocking laugh, the crowd's stares, her mother's voice cutting through like a blade. Sierra and Caden sat quietly in the back, both exhausted from the emotional weight of it all. Marcia drove steadily, her eyes fixed on the road, though her thoughts were still anchored to the mall. Finally, Imani spoke. "Mom, do things like this ever stop? People just assuming the worst?" Marcia paused before answering. "They don't stop on their own. Change comes when people hold others accountable. What happened today is just one example of something bigger, a pattern people live through every day. The fight is in how you respond, how you demand respect without losing yourself in the process." Sierra leaned forward from the back seat. "It's scary, though. He really thought he could just laugh at us like that, like we weren't even worth listening to." Marcia nodded. "That's because he underestimated you. People who thrive on control want you to believe you're powerless. But when you stand tall, even in fear, you remind them you are not invisible." Caden finally spoke, his voice low but steady. He looked so small when you called him out. Like he couldn't hide anymore. Marcia glanced at him through the rearview mirror. That's the power of truth. It doesn't need volume. It doesn't need force. It only needs clarity. And once it's spoken, it cannot be silenced. Imani turned toward her mother, her voice softer now. "I thought I was alone when he laughed at me, like nobody would ever believe me. But when you showed up," she trailed off, her throat tightening. "I felt like I mattered again." Marcia reached across the console, squeezing her daughter's hand. "You mattered the whole time. His laughter didn't change that. Remember, Imani, the way someone treats you is a reflection of them, not you. You are more than anyone's assumptions." Silence followed, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was reflective, thoughtful. Each of them sat with the weight of what had happened, but also with the clarity of what it meant. By the time they pulled into their driveway, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink. Imani stepped out of the car feeling taller than she had hours ago. The humiliation hadn't vanished, but it had been reshaped, no longer just a scar, but a lesson she could carry. That night, she lay in bed replaying her mother's words. Authority isn't armor. It exists to serve. She thought about how Kessler had mocked her, and how quickly his confidence had shattered when confronted with accountability. The memory still hurt, but it also filled her with a sense of power she hadn't felt before. Because the truth was this: what happened at Southridge Mall wasn't unique. Stories like hers happened everywhere, to kids who didn't have a federal judge for a mother to step in. Kids whose voices were silenced, whose truth was laughed at until it broke them. And that was the real weight of the lesson. Authority, unchecked, can humiliate. But accountability, when demanded, can restore dignity. Imani had lived that truth in front of dozens of strangers who would now carry the memory of what they'd seen. Maybe it would change how they viewed the next confrontation they witnessed. Maybe it would make them think twice before dismissing a teenager's honesty. The mall incident was one moment in one city on one afternoon, but it revealed a truth that stretched far wider. Respect is not optional, dignity is not negotiable, and arrogance, when challenged by truth, crumbles every time. Imani fell asleep with that thought. Her story, once a source of shame, had become a reminder. She wasn't powerless. She had a voice. And no laugh, no smirk, no badge could ever erase it. And as her mother had said, truth doesn't need rehearsing. It stands on its own. So if there's one thing to take away from what happened in that shopping center, it's this: never let someone's assumptions define you. Never let their laughter shrink you. And when arrogance tries to silence you, stand tall. Because the truth, your truth, will always outlast their mockery. And if you're listening to this story right now, let it be a reminder in your own life. Stand firm, speak clearly, and know your worth. And if you want more stories that shine a light on moments like these, real, raw, and human, make sure to subscribe. because the lessons don't end here.